Our talk today is with Teddy Kinyanjui, the co-founder of Seedballs Kenya, an innovative partnership that safely and economically replants indigenous trees and grass seeds in Kenya and East Africa. Seed balls are an innovative way to effectively distribute indigenous trees in large quantities throughout Kenya. A seed ball is a tree or grass seed coated in a protective charcoal coating, keeping the seed safe until it's time to germinate. Their process involves 3 steps. 1. Collecting discarded cooking charcoal waste, thereby cleaning the environment. 2. Cleaning the charcoal dust while adding a binder material. And 3. Creating seed balls to complete the tree to fuel to tree cycle. Thank you, Teddy, for being here today, and welcome. I would like to ask you, what is a seed ball and why is it important?
A seed ball it's a very simple thing. It's as it says, it's a seed inside of a ball of what we use as charcoal dust for the coating on the outside. And this was based out of a sort of lifetime, I'd say, really, of doing dryland forestry with my late dad and within our company, because we realized on one side, having an efficient stove is only part of the solution. You know, if your car uses less fuel, you'll drive further. Suddenly you have cheaper, more efficiency. So there can be that rebound energy effect. And not only that, with population growth, urbanization, we realize that as stove makers, it's beyond even just responsible, but also in our own business interests to make sure that 20, 30 years down the line, people are still barbecuing with charcoal if that's what they want to do. So growing trees is a big part of that. So we'd spent many years doing tree planting experiments in different parts of the country because there wasn't very much information on just the simple question of how do you grow a bag of charcoal? How long does it take? How much does it cost? Because typically most forestry practices in Kenya are plantation, traditional straight lines, pine trees, fir trees in the highland. Most of the charcoal is indigenous acacia trees from the drylands. Those agronomics had not really been done. So we started doing that in the early 2000s. We'd get some planting contracts, people would hear about me, my dad, oh, these guys like planting trees, we should do some at our farm. And the seed ball concept came about after doing many years of traditional tree planting with the plastic bag sapling, digging a hole, watering it. And that's fine. We support that. I love it and do it all the time. There are many species you'll never do as a seed ball. But when you're doing 1 or 2 trees that way, it's much easier than if you do 10,000 and digging 10,000 holes, suddenly 10,000 plastic bags. If the rains don't come, you're watering 10,000 plants. If the rains do come, you can't get to the site because all the roads are muddy. So there are all these logistical challenges with the traditional tree planting, especially on scale. And we were at one of these sites near a highway just near Nairobi. And I was on one side of the fence, struggling with all this stuff. The pickup was stuck in the mud, what have you. And as I looked over, there's the guys from the highway authority who are clearing all the grass. And also noticed they're cutting down the same little small seedlings of the same species of acacia tree that we were paying someone, 50 shillings to plant 2 meters away. So I started thinking, wait a minute, this thing's growing like a weed on the side of the road. What on earth am I doing? Doing all this plastic and shovels and what have you. And I can sort of remember looking up and starting to think, well, where did all the trees in all of Kenya come from to begin with? Because it wasn't like 200 years ago we were planting saplings, right? It's a lucky seed in the right place at the right time, right conditions. So we got really excited about that. Oh, this is fantastic. So I went to the Forest Service, bought a whole bunch of different indigenous seeds for that region, and threw them all out on this little demo farm that we manage there. And the rains failed. And of course, indigenous tree seeds are food for many, many types of birds, guinea fowls, squirrels, mice, you name it. Lots of stuff eats tree seeds. And so, of course, all those seeds got eaten. So that led me sort of back to the drawing board and realized, 2 options. You either seed so heavily that you fill everything up and they can't eat them all, but that's impractical and expensive, or find something that you could coat the seeds with that for us, our parameters were non-toxic, readily available, and cheap to be able to do en masse. And so once we'd had this discussion with Elson from Tam Feeds, And char dust, it really made so much sense that if you could use the waste of, because some of these charcoal piles that we clean up around different markets in the city, the really old ones, we've actually found coins from like the 1920s in the bottom of them. And when you go through the charcoal, it's sort of urban archaeology. You see the first plastic bags, you start seeing the scratch cards for phones from the 2000s, COVID masks. There's a little layer now of those. And it's quite interesting thinking that some of that charcoal dust that, you on your safari, you might throw that little seed out the window, that might be right where the thing's, parent tree came from about 50 years ago. So that sort of circular economy side of it was perfect from that aspect. And then also, nothing eats charcoal, doesn't have any nutrient, doesn't taste like anything. And so most things would walk past it and not know there's a seed inside of the seed ball.
It's a brilliant idea. It's so simple. That's what's amazing about it. It's so simple and it's
Well,
right.
it's really just copying nature. We found at the end of after struggling against nature with plastic bag seedlings, realized just go with the flow.
Can you tell me about the partnership between Chardust and Cookswell?
Yes, absolutely. So the partnership between Chardust and Cookswell goes back quite a long way, actually. So Elson, who founded Chardust Limited, he's originally Canadian, and he'd come out here doing. His dad was a vet, a wildlife vet, and so he'd come out here doing all sorts of exciting things. Darting zebras. There's lots of good stories about it, and so I had a big affinity with the outdoors and the environment and stuff. He was running a company called Chardust Limited, which was the first company to use the charcoal waste. So when they bring cooking charcoal into the town, when they're unloading it, repacking it, about 10% is left over as dust and fines. They used to just throw that away or landfill it or just leave it in the streets. So he developed the method of making them into briquettes, which you're probably familiar with, like American Kingsford barbecue style ones, and had been in that sort of realm of doing those type of businesses for a long time. And since Cookswell makes energy saving cook stoves and ovens and barbecues, we'd bought and sold his briquettes for many years. He'd bought and sold our ovens for many years. And I remember over a couple of beers, I'd had this idea of doing these seed balls, and we'd started rolling them by hand, but you only make, a pound a day sort of thing. And so, I remember discussing with him, what if we could fill up like airplanes with these things and, make tens of millions of them? And he's a real engineer and innovator. So, he likes tinkering with stuff and coming up with things. And so, yeah, I sort of challenged him, let's do this. Let's make a machine that can make these seed balls, coated seeds on scale.
Wow, what a great story. Like, why do people use charcoal so much in Kenya?
Yeah, charcoal in Kenya is one of the prime sources of cooking energy for not only domestic use, but also for a lot of commercial, and especially in urban areas. Now, more so, more people are urbanizing, hotels, cafes, what have you. There are two sides to that. One, of course, is cheap, available, reliable. If you have the electricity go off, you can't cook dinner, and then you go to bed hungry. Charcoal always works. It's also cheaper a lot of times than many other energy sources and more available. I read a study in the city. You can usually walk 100 meters and you'll find someone selling charcoal. Not the same for gas, maybe no electricity. Then, of course, there's the cultural side of things where things cooked on charcoal taste a certain way. And that's what people are so used to. So there are those two sides of it that are very interesting aspect to the charcoal industry in Kenya because the charcoal has been made illegal to transport without a permit, but it's very difficult to get permits. And so that keeps it in a very gray sort of area because as a essential energy good, probably 70, 80% of the population uses on a daily basis. Not having it in a formal value chain and formal industry, of course, undermines lots of things, the sustainability of it, rule of law, all of this. Unfortunately, a majority of charcoal is probably made as a byproduct of clearing land for agriculture or grazing. And in the last, decade, 2 decades, there's been a huge change in land tenureship. People have subdivided, they have title deeds. Prices of food have never been better. The technology for farming, solar pumps, drip, hybrid seeds. So all of those have come together to lead to areas that in the 80s or 90s would never have been farmed are now very productive farms. And the cheapest way, if you inherit 10 acres of land and you want to grow maize and beans, you could either cut all the trees down, burn them in a big pile and get ashes, or make it into charcoal and make $1,000 and you can buy your first solar pump or whatever. So there's a big discrepancy between what used to be a sort of, somewhat illegal going into national parks, stealing trees. While that still does happen, it's much the minority because most of charcoal produced in Kenya is a byproduct from clearing for agriculture. And of course, recently when they put that ban in, because East Africa Community has, trade agreements, then people would bring charcoal in from Uganda and Tanzania, and with even less certain provenance and where it was made and how it was made. So it's a real fascinating industry. It doesn't get, continue on about it because I'm quite passionate about just the sheer huge strength of this industry. Employs more than 1 million people. Apparently, revenue is equal to the tea revenue in Kenya in that industry. And yet it hasn't been formalized or regularized ever, which, puts all of these people in, whether it's manufacturing or transport, at this disadvantage of, well, advantage of not paying formal taxes, I suppose, but disadvantage, of course, of you don't have social security from it. If you get injured on the job, where are you going to get health care? If you get caught by the police, they may extort a bribe or something from you. And so that's been a big basis between both of our companies, has been looking at ways to minimize, not only so from the briquette side of char dust, reusing that waste to make briquettes to use the charcoal, so it's not just wasted. And then from Cookswell Jiko's, our sort of ethos has been the seed to ash cycle. So for people who are able to, if you can grow a few trees, only use the branches. So we develop kilns for making your own charcoal, and then use that in an efficient stove. And, while that's not going to work for someone in an apartment, there are millions of people who have small farms, backyards, businesses, what have you, who are now looking at more and more, why should I buy something that I can grow sustainably for cheaper than if I bought it? And so the seed balls are a key part on how do you grow trees for a low cost. Yeah, and that's really sort of what's been a lot of the focus behind both of our businesses, is that sort of full sustainability on the household biomass chain, which we really believe is putting the whole value chain into the hands of the user. And, if you don't have to buy it, then you know where it's coming from, you grew it, it's cheaper, all of those.
The economic factors or the importance of charcoal to the Kenyan economy can't be overstated. This is a business that supports the population aside from the positive aspects of tree to fuel to tree cycle. So that's very, very important.
Even some people who don't need to use charcoal. I've been to conferences about the evils of charcoal, and yet at lunchtime, guess what everyone's eating for lunch? Charcoal grilled chicken. And so you sometimes see that and you think, hey, wait a minute.
What do they mean by the evils of charcoal?
What's typically, I think, been the biggest issue with it is because it's been in a gray area and slightly illicit market, it's not understood. The data that could be there is not there. And, it's typically been seen as if you drive past a forest that's being cleared and they're making lots of charcoal, a lot of times it's easier to say the charcoal makers chop that forest down rather than to go into what you'd call, I suppose, a political ecology of whose land is that? Why have they chosen to farm? Why weren't they keeping those trees? Was charcoal a byproduct of utilizing the land for a different purpose, or was charcoal the core driver for that deforestation? And a lot of those questions become very complicated with social issues. Why is there corruption? Now, that answer is not, a straightforward answer, of course, for people in some of these organizations, especially in a lot of the non-governmental sort of environmental type and civil society. It becomes difficult, to go beyond sort of finding that problem if the root is governance, because their job is world agroforestry, not world civic education, so people elect better leaders who will make better land use spatial planning policies or whatever.
Now, can you tell me about what is the three-step process in making a seed ball?
So it's collecting the charcoal dust and milling and cleaning it all up. And then it's getting the seeds from the Kenya Forest Research Institute. So they're the government body who is mandated for all tree seed supply, testing, provenance, germination trials. So we buy certified seed from them and then make the seed ball. And you roll them up in a big ball. Imagine how a snowball sort of forms with a seed on the inside of it. And then when the charcoal's the right size, you pull them off, sun dry them for a day or two, and bag them up, and then send them out all over the country. So the big trick with this is the seed ball's only for protecting the seed from being eaten. The main key of all of this is the seed, of course. And so getting the right type of seed to the right area. So we always work backwards with customers. If you're from New York, upstate, we'd ask what type of tree is growing in your backyard, in your neighborhood, in your valley, which is local to that, indigenous to that area, and has been overexploited by people. And so that really helps solve this question of which tree do you send to where. Just grow more of the same thing that's already growing in that area that people are using too much of. And the same thing goes with the grass seeds that we do as well.
So do you send seed balls all over the world?
No, right now we're doing species for East Africa sort of ecoregions. Our focus really is Kenya. But what's happened through the power of social media and some of the TV things and stuff is we've had what we call offshoots. And so the people have seen seed balls on, whatever video or something, and have started making their own. And so they're from Pakistan to Ivory Coast to India to all sorts. So someone actually just featured on the BBC the other day who said, I saw this video of this guy in Kenya who was rolling up these seeds, and now him and like 1,000 friends are doing this somewhere in Rajasthan or something like this. And so for us, that's been such a wonderful thing to think that, again, a simple, basic concept, and especially with good communication, has been so lucky. Other people can be doing the same thing. And when they reach out to us, we say what I was just telling you. The key thing is the right type of seed for the right area.
The fact that people all over the world think this is a great idea, I mean, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. It's the thing is also it's like an ancient idea. The idea of coating a seed with something. Apparently, the Egyptians were doing this 3,000 years ago. Horticulture greenhouses do it with whatever carrot seeds or something. But I think this application of especially using it not because our initial thing was just how do you grow many, many trees for cheap? But what we've seen that was even such a surprise to myself is just how much fun it is for people. And, someone to pick up a slingshot after 40 years of not doing it and have a little competition with their buddy about, no, I can shoot this seed ball the furthest or whatever. There's been that side to it that I, really was so pleasantly surprised about because, like, as a kid in my school, tree planting was punishment. If you did something wrong, you had to carry buckets of water to that tree. And I remember as a little kid thinking, this damn tree making me Sunday afternoon. And I think this side of it from seeing, some students have made like bags that go on a camel for their STEM project, that when the camel's walking, it drops the seeds out one by one behind it. Other people using drones, helicopters. I mean, that whole side of having that engagement in, because then you sort of, it's your one foot in the door. You have someone really excited about, now I'm going to grow a tree. And then it's, well, what kind of tree? And then do you remember that name and what's it used for? And then, do you recognize them when you travel and you see that tree again? And I think all of those parts with especially environmental awareness and protection, it really people have to know what they're conserving to begin with, and that seed balls has had such a huge impact on that side of it. It's been really exciting.
I want to ask you about renewable energy source, sustainability, wood products. I mean, I'm sure there are many industries that rely on wood products. So, can you just talk to
Mhm.
me a little bit about how seed balls contribute to those things?
Yeah, so beyond just a wood fuel, I mean, a lot of people still even use firewood for firing bricks for making a house if you're doing clay brick house or whatever. But also the forage side of things, livestock's a big part of almost any farmer's life. So having trees like this as banya that intercrop well in an agroforestry system where you got, nitrogen fixing livestock fodder as well as the pollination side of it, more people going into beekeeping. Acacia is incredibly good honey. So understanding to grow indigenous trees as a beekeeper instead of, eucalyptus that may not produce the same quality of honey or whatever. The wood industry, has so much potential. It's like one of these endlessly renewable resources when done in a correct, sustainable, well thought out way. Unfortunately, as with many things, it has its challenges in Kenya. I think we run out a huge deficit, import most of our timber from plantations in Tanzania or somewhere. But it is starting to change. And I think from farm forestry, as opposed to large, 10, 20,000 acre plantations, people are starting to realize that even just simple things like the cost of timber on an indigenous tree is higher than a commercial plantation species. And so if you can afford to wait, grow a hardwood instead of one of those other ones, get a bit more money. A majority of Kenyans are farmers, and trees on farms have a huge role in whether it's wood fuel, all these different things that I'd mentioned. And I think the bigger thing is which trees on which farms. And again, trying to really push and help people understand the importance of using native and indigenous trees because they have better ecosystem services, biodiversity roles, what have you, is a really key thing. Because, people, you're always glammed by something that's new and foreign, and, oh, I'll try this new miracle wonder tree. And, the gold is actually beneath your feet and you just haven't noticed, type of thing.
I wanted to ask you about your stoves. One of the things I found most interesting was that your stove use less energy. Can you tell me a little bit about your stove business and how it contributes to efficiency?
Yeah, so our stove business, Cookswell Gcos, is actually named after my dad, Maxwell, and so cooks well in the stove, so that worked out. And he started in the mid 80s. It was through a World Bank and USAID grant of making a single pot cook stove that used 50% less charcoal. And so him and some artisans went to Thailand to study their Thai bucket stove that has this little ceramic lining. But of course, the cooking there is stir fry. It's very different from how we cook in Kenya. So they came back, redesigned the stove with some of those core concepts for our type of cooking and our type of production and use and what have you. Spent a long time giving out, different samples to like 30 women group, and they'd bring them back and he'd say, okay, were they too tall? Were they too fat? Did it cook too slowly, too quickly? All of those. So a very user-centered sort of design feedback. He then went all over East and Central and West Africa, actually, for many years, training existing stove makers how to make and how to improve their type of stove. And so it's more, what are you using already and how do you improve it, make it more efficient, that sort of approach to it. This clay-lined Kenya ceramic Jiko, that standard is now in, I think, over like 35 African countries. It's kind of the standard baseline now of all charcoal stoves after the metal ones, which is a really cool thing. Again, to think, imitation in the form of flattery. It's great to know that there's, tens of millions of these stoves out cooking dinner for people every night, using less charcoal. And that was really the goal. What he did find, though, on his travels was majority of cooking was boiling or frying. There wasn't such a big baking because ovens, not as common. Electricity, gas is expensive. So we designed charcoal baking ovens, which have picked up a lot. I'm sure a lot of the camps and lodges you've probably stayed at on safari in Kenya have them in the back. You should always check the kitchen and you'll see one of those little Cookswell ovens doing the bread or whatever. Then to lots of bakers, if you're a baker doing wedding cakes and the power goes out, what do you do? So, and home cooking, people smoking the ribs and weekend roasting and stuff. So that side of the business has been very interesting, doing more commercial size of efficient charcoal use stoves, because also more people are living in cities. And, typically when you live in a city, you don't go home and cook lunch for 2.5 hours. You eat at a little cafe or something. So looking into all of that, we do export them to someone in Switzerland, which has been really interesting. Came on safari once, actually, in COVID, missed his flight, saw 2 of our stoves at a hotel somewhere and just fell in love. And he's started like 3-4 containers so far. And that's really nice because to think, typically you don't do that much manufacture export, a lot of export from Kenya's raw materials. So it's been really nice, going to the customs office and they're shocked. They're like, what do you mean you're sending barbecues to Switzerland of all places? And apparently the Swiss love them, it's nice handmade safari oven, not cheap Chinese sort of Weber or whatever. So it's an interesting business, the whole stove side of things. It's been, just great finding, people supporting a whole bakery off of one of the. I often wonder, if the guy from Samsung, if he sees one of his fridges, if they get as happy as I do when I see one of our ovens in action somewhere. I hope so.
Great story. Did you get started in the business because your father started this and had these ideas and you worked alongside with him? Is that how you got involved?
Yeah, since so someone was asking me the other day, since I was allowed to play with matches, I think I've been doing it pretty much. And then also as a terrible student, so doing stovework was a lot more interesting and engaging than college and high school.
Tell me how the seed balls get distributed.
It's really, I mean, everyone and anyone. It's amazing. We once in one day had a priest from a Catholic church come in and a mum from a mosque and a Hindu temple priest buy seed balls all in the same day. And I remember thinking, this can't be real. Like, this is perfect. Everyone wants them. Mostly, probably half of the business is private people in Nairobi who, are visiting their grandma up country or want to plant some trees along the fence on the farm or something. As the bulk of our work is just, you Google, where do I get tree seeds? Our thing comes up. So you order a kilo, take them home, go grow some trees. Then the other half of it's probably split between some larger corporate orders. A lot of people might do little, specially packed ones, celebrating a birthday, a wedding, whatever it is. Everyone goes home with some seeds. And then we do have a portal that we set up because we got really lucky with some of this online media stuff. We have, viral videos in 80, 90 million sort of level. And so people asking from all corners, how do we help? And we set this up as a business purely from the sustainability standpoint. Um, just if suddenly the climate change money runs out, you're stuck out on a limb. So we said, let's just do this as a business, reinvest, continue growing. Which I'm proud to say we're in our 9th year, and that's worked really well actually, which is great. And the thought really was, at the end of the day is, how do you get this to scale? And I think being able to keep it as a business and, be driven with that sort of business side of it to get out to so many different people. We've now set up like a portal where, you could buy a bag of seed balls for one of our partners and then we'll deliver it to them and they'll plant it on your behalf. So if you wanted, we have some safari partners actually who do that for every safari they'll donate, $100, 500 or whatever it is. And then we'll set up Google Maps and each of the different people, whether it's hikers, paragliders, a school, a community organization is doing a restoration project, whatever. So we have a lot of really good partners we've worked with over the years. We'll send them whatever seed balls you've bought. And then when we get feedback, we'll send back, thanks, John. Here's so-and-so planting the seed balls in this part of the country. And so that's been really interesting, actually, because we've had, like kids do a bake sale in San Jose, California, and send $22 to send, a pack of seed balls to a school somewhere in Kenya. All the way up to Bolt, the big taxi hailing company, bought 15 tons of seed balls 2 years ago, which we distributed all over the country, which is amazing. I think it was a bit of public relations. They made like a fun little ad out of it, made me wear a suit, which I didn't really like what to do. They also had the sustainability lady had said when she'd seen our work, we were featured on the BBC Green Planet on one of the human episodes from the David Attenborough series. And I think they'd, just previously sort of been writing a check to a carbon company to offset, but felt like they wanted a bit more ownership of the product. And so after we distributed all of these, they had a third party go and follow up and visit. Now Rachel at the farm next to Nakuru planted 10 seed balls, 2 of them grew. And I think for them that was interesting because it was probably they're a different company, also they're young and innovative and looking for new things. So I think that helped a lot. But it was really great. It was very, very good. It was our first sort of really big order at scale that we'd been able to process and firm up our partnerships with people around the country with.
Since tourism is so important in Kenya, does the government help fund seed balls?
We have pretty much only actually worked with private sector only pretty much. It's, a bit more nimble and sort of fast. Working with government can be slow. But we've been very happy to at least have this partnership with purchasing all of our seeds from the Kenya Forest Research Institute, KEFRI, and they've done a wonderful job and been very supportive over the years, advice from scientists and stuff of, which species to grow where. And so, for us, it's been actually very interesting because also, luckily, at this particular time, the government has a lot of big goals for reforestation to try and get the country back to, I think it was the 30% forest cover was historical sort of maximum. And so there are multiple programs going on with their end. Of course, for us, what we'd really been focused on with the seed balls is a lot of the places where charcoal is coming from are in the dry lands. And tree planting there is very difficult. A lot of it, the land tenureship isn't as secure. They're not fenced. There's lots of wildlife. There's goats. No water. I can remember seeing tree planting programs happen where the local village didn't even have drinking water, and they've brought a whole truck to water the seedlings. And you imagine that, builds resentment from people and such. And so for us, our focus really has been with seed balls is those marginal sort of what we could say orphan areas in the restoration matrix in Kenya, because there's a lot of really good work happening in highlands with farmers. But if you go somewhere where people are pastoralists, they may be using firewood, they may be allowing other people to make charcoal, but you ask for 10 people with 10 shovels, then they don't have it. They might have $100,000 worth of goats walking around, but they don't own a shovel. Why would you have a shovel? I'm really rich. I've got my livestock. So in those sort of areas, especially, not only doing the tree seeds for restoring tree cover that's lost, but grass seed balls have picked up a lot of interest recently. Because, of course, as I was saying, 30% of Kenya historically was covered by forests. That does leave 70% that was not forested as its natural ecological state. And in a lot of areas where overgrazing has led to reduction of those very palatable species of grasses, it's been really interesting the last 3 or 4 years pushing the grass seed balls a lot. And the reception you get from some people don't understand it. Grass, why would you grow grass? What do you need more grass for? See, there's grass there anyway. And then people, especially ones who own livestock, they really know this is why we need more grass. It's erosion control, it's even pollinated, it's, all this different stuff. So learning and working more in that realm actually is almost the larger overall job in environmental management and restoration in Kenya is the drylands. I mean, we have to do everything, but a lot of times those areas do get left out because they're inaccessible. They're very far away. There's not ready water. If you put a seedling in, how do you water it? And so direct seeding as this form of, natural regeneration, assisted natural regeneration, is very effective in those areas.
So I wanted to ask you about the Woodlands Trust and your father's legacy.
A very large part, I think. It's been, I've been so lucky to spend definitely my first 20 sort of years in life very much outdoors, most of the time. And, it's just been perfect. And I think that's led to probably building that curiosity of how, ecosystems function, what type of plants and organisms and insects exist there, and all of that side of it. And once you get the bug, you can't go back. I'm sure, as you know, being involved in safaris and stuff, once you start learning about just how incredibly complex and important and critical all of these different environmental concerns around us are, you get very, very passionate about it. And then as you get older, you start getting, I don't want to say jaded and apathetic, but the world a bit more, and you do see what a huge impact people have had on it, and you realize it can't just be negative all the time. And so being lucky enough to have gone on some of these free flights, so any of the sort of airplane flights we've done with the seed balls has been really kind pilots who might have a dead leg and they're going somewhere with an empty seat or whatever, and we're willing to take us up because otherwise helicopters are expensive. And getting that sort of view from above, and when you start looking at things through a conservationist and environmentalist eye, on one end you might, and I've been there with friends who say, "Oh, look at those pretty flowers on that sandy part of the hill," and I'm thinking those are invasive Scottish thistle, that second grade erosion from overgrazing. You start noticing all these things, and you look around, and everyone else is just kind of admiring the sunset, and you kind of sometimes wish you didn't actually know it in a way. Um, Funny enough, but once you know it, and you see it all the time. And if you can do anything to help improve the world around us, then great, fun. It's interesting and very engaging.